Hello, everyone. As many of you know, my name is Lauren Stramos. I am the student caucus leader for the Non-Religion in a Complex Future project. Welcome to this Meet the Author session, Non-Religion in a Complex Future, the last one of 2021, oh my gosh, which is a little scary to say. I was going to say these last 2 years have gone by so quickly, especially this semester. But thank you all for being here. And the webinar today will follow the usual format. In the first half, we'll introduce our author and she will give her presentation. So as usual, I just kindly ask that you make sure your microphones are muted. And then following the presentation is when we will have the Q&A session and hopefully engage in some discussion. But please feel free to use the chat function of Zoom throughout the presentation if there are any questions or comments you would like to make during that time. So I will go ahead now and introduce our author of today's Meet the Author session. Anne-Laure Zwilling is an established researcher at the Joint Research Unit Droit, Religieux, Entreprise et Société of the University of Strasbourg and the French National Scientific Research Center. She holds a PhD in religious sciences and a habilitation in religious anthropology. Her work focuses on minority religious groups in France and their relationship to the founding texts, as well as on religious developments in present-day Europe, especially regarding the ways in which religious plurality is taken into account in society. Anne-Laure is co-director of the research team, Religion in the Light of Pluralism, and is the director of the International Research Network, an online information project, Eurel, which provides legal and sociological information concerning religion in Europe and Canada. She is co-editor with Pierre Breschon of the book Entreprise religieuse ou Atheism militant, français, livres, religieux aujourd'hui, published in 2020 by Presse Universitaire de Grenoble. And this book, of course, is serving as the focus of our discussion today. So Anne-Laure, thank you so very much for being here today, and I will now turn things over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. Let me know if anybody can't hear me properly or if there is any problem, and I will dive in immediately. So I'm presenting this book now. I'm interested in the topic of non-religion because my focus is on religious minorities and the evolution of the minority-majority relations and the changes in religious dynamics, which result from an increase in the number of people who declare themselves without religion in France and in Europe. So when in 2015, non-religion was a topic suggested for the yearly conference of the Association Française de Sciences Sociales des Religions, that's the French Association of Sociologists of Religion, I joined the organization team in which there was Pierre Breschon and Lionel Obadia. So this is just to make sure everybody is aware I'm not a specialist of non-religion. Our conference took place in February 2016, and this book stems from the conference, although it's not conference proceedings. At the time of the conference, someone asked me if we chose that topic because of the logic of market. They said that since the importance of religions is diminishing, it's undoubtedly a matter of survival for the sociologists of religion to also take non-religion as their subject. And beyond the joke, it's true that at that time, we were acknowledging for the first time, or starting to acknowledge, taking into account in France, a double reality, that is the decline of religion and the inevitable progress of secularization, revealed in particular by the demographic progression of atheism. So you can see European Value Survey and the works of Pierre Breschon on this. At the same time, we were also taking into account and discussing what was called spiritual proliferation, new groups, new ways of relating to supernatural forces or entities. And this postmodern globalized world seemed reinvested by religions. And we also were taking into account a religious increase in other parts of the world than Western Europe. So our concern for the conference was at first broadening the focus of doing sociology of religion by taking into account all kinds of relation to religion. Our idea was that religion can also be better understood by looking at what makes its margins, what's outside it, those who contest it, those who are not interested in it. And we also wanted a better knowledge of the world of those who have long been in sociological surveys grouped together under the label without religion, those which are called none of the above, so the nones, because not taking them into account, not having a look at these people was leaving aside an increasing number of persons and their worldview, their specific beliefs or non-beliefs. And above that, these people were a group in evolution. Why one is without religion, how one expresses it, how it is affirmed. These are new realities that we wanted to identify and analyze. But the responses to our call for paper really showed that it is a very complex group and a difficult reality to grasp. These responses, all the answers that we had to our call for paper, allowed to appreciate a wide array of ways of being outside religion that we identified. For the conference, it wasn't totally clear, but it became totally clear in the group. We identified these people as ranging from total indifference to active opposition. And this is how we ended up with the title for our conference, which was From Religious Indifference to Militant Atheism. So that was for the conference. Of course, the conference highlighted, as I said, these many faces of non-religion, and we thought that what we had discussed together during the conference was worth publishing. So I maybe need to point out here that the field of non-religion has certainly not been studied as much in France, and especially in French-speaking literature, than it has been in the English-speaking part of the world, to say it roughly. So maybe you would be expecting perhaps a different content in a book on atheism and religious indifference and so ever, if it were an English speaking book. But this, as being from France and in French, I will now come to the content of the book, but try to highlight everything that is specifically relevant to France or Western Europe. I'll try to highlight it so as not to maybe repeat things that you're already familiar with, and also to maybe start the discussion on what is specific from France. So making the book, was the usual. Dropping some of the contributions were not that interesting, or whose author didn't want to join the publication, and find other authors to fill in certain gaps. And then we ended up with this book. So during the conference, we had organized the contributions in some kind of topical approaches, but it didn't really fit. And we certainly couldn't keep that for the book. So we went more for some journey. So our first chapters in the book have a more theoretical and also more historical orientation, and then follow some more precise field studies. The book opens with a chapter which examines the existence of atheism and religious indifference in the antique times. It's from François d'Engremont, and he shows the diversity of Greek philosophy concerning atheism and indifference, religious indifference. He points out that a strong contemporary atheist argument, namely that gods have been invented by men, can already be found in the ancient Greek literature. And by doing that, he challenges a common representation that can be found in many places nowadays, an evolutionary representation. You can find it in Durkheim's work, for instance, according to which all societies have been built around religious beliefs. And from paganism and polytheism, we would have passed to evolve to monotheism, and then today to a more secularized conception of the world. But on the other hand, atheism, as we speak of it nowadays, is a recent social phenomenon, because even if they did speak about it in Greek literature, it wasn't that much of a social phenomenon. So Philippe Martin shows that even at the time of Les Lumières, the 18th century, it was still rare in France, and the term atheist would be more used in a pejorative way about someone. You know, it was like treating them being a pervert without ethics. than a personal claim to some kind of identity. We after that have a chapter from Jean Bobéron, whose name is probably familiar to many of you, and he recalls his theory on the several thresholds of secularization. So I won't go through that here because I guess this is known. Then Pierre Bréchon puts the French situation in the broader context of secularization in Europe in all its diversity. He uses data from the European Values Survey and shows that it is secularization in Europe is very composite, very diverse, and non-religion atheism have multiple variations between countries, but also between generation and between genders inside countries. It seemed to us interesting to contrast this European description with one of the United States. In France, we often understand and present the United States as an example of a developed country which would not be affected by secularization. You know, like people have this kind of prejudice to more or less, as I was saying earlier, that there's some kind of evolution, and the more the country is developed, and then the less religious it will be. And so, of course, all the open and modern countries would have to be secularized or going on the process of being secularized, apart from the United States. And this is how it is often presented. And we have here a chapter from Nathalie Caron, and she highlights the growth of nonce and indifference towards religion in the United States, at the same time highlighting the importance of religious freedom in the United States, and then the specific context which it gives to religious indifference. So this is not a first part as such in the book, because we didn't have different parts, but it is these are some kind of general chapters, a broad overview of all the different theoretical aspects under which non-religion can be grasped, theoretical grounded in reality, of course, but broader chapters. And then we have focuses, one on two specific populations in France, two focuses on specific populations in France, one on the atheism of French scientists. There's an original qualitative survey and quantitative survey from Abel François and Raoul Magny-Berton among the scientists, and their specific part in atheism. Another specific study concerning France is a survey of teenagers and how they relate to non-religion and religious indifference. And Sébastien Rocher, Sandrine Astor, and Omer Billen, who wrote this chapter, also have tried to see what kind of link can be made, what kind of relation can be made between the relationship to religion and the national feeling, the feeling of belonging to the country. These two chapters are followed by a presentation of a European Federation of Associations which defends the humanist cause in front of the institutions of the European Union. And that's Bérangère Massignon. So France, and then Europe, and after that, two specific and very different national contexts. One is Tunisia today with Émilie Pontagnier. She provides a study on what it means to choose a secular school nowadays in Tunisia. The other specific study is one that concerns East Germany in the Soviet era. Eva Patzel studies the implementation of a teaching which is called scientific atheism, which was aimed at educating the communist citizen. It was set up in the 1970s, and interestingly shows that it evolved in the 1980s from being a justification of atheism to an effort to understand religions and accept believers. Finally, Philippe Portier, which you probably also know, or at least his name, he was kind enough to write the conclusion of the book. So he clearly exposes the typology that we established in the book, religious indifference and militant atheism. He recalls the development of non-religion, especially in France, and then draws some general remarks on axiology, the systems of value pertaining to religion and non-religion, and suggests that the boundaries between religion and non-religion are perhaps not as clear, no longer as clear-cut as they once were. And I think this is very interesting because that's something which I haven't either studied or anything, but I'm just putting it forward for the discussion there, because I have been interested to see that a certain number of surveys in France show that among Catholics, people who declare themselves being Catholics, there is an important part of these people who declare not believing in God, which is interesting because you would at first think that you would find 100% of people declaring themselves Catholics saying that they believe in God. So among other beliefs, traditional Catholic or Christian beliefs, saying that they believe in God, saying that they believe in the resurrection, saying that believe or whatever, you find an important number of Catholics who declare they do not believe in such and such a thing. And I don't remember the exact number, the precise number. I could go and have a look, but I'm not very good with numbers, which is terrible for someone doing sociology. But it's between 25 and 30%, so it's rather important. And I was wondering, you know, if that's some kind of illustration of this blurring boundary, because you have these silent non-religious people who before could have been silent religious people with more or less the same discussion. Thanks, Lauren, for the reference. So now that I have presented the book, I just wanted to provide some kind of final remarks just to open the discussion also. One of them is something that I didn't know whether I should say it at first and start the presentation with that, but then maybe it's preferable to express it at the end. Some of you may have noticed, if you have been through the book, that we, on the title of the book, the subtitle is Penser l'irreligion aujourd'hui, thinking irreligion today. But in the book, we speak a lot about non-religion, and in his concluding chapter, Philippe Portier uses the word a religion. I'm not sure if I pronounce it properly in English. So I don't know how far French would be different from the English, if the nuance would be the same. But if we say a religion in French, it's the a before the word is like you take something away from it. Like atheism is theism without, it's without God. So that would be without religion. So you take something away, and so you remain in the kind of non. Irreligion is like in irresistible, it's also can be understood as being opposed to religion. And non-religion is what is not religion, but it can also be understood as opposed, you know, like it is anything but religion. It is not religion. So any kind of terms that we tried to think of, and we discussed with Philippe Portier, should we try to keep the same term, the same vocabulary throughout the book, or should we ask the authors to stick to one way of expressing it? And we kept it as that. And we thought it's important maybe to say that we failed to find one term which would fit everyone, because we still can't provide a very clear definition of what non-religion or irreligion or a religion is. Well, maybe we need to also highlight that we can't really have a very clear and proper definition of religion either. So, but still, there is no term that is totally satisfying. And in the debate where non-religion possibly could or maybe should be defined differently than starting from religion and going to what it is not or what is without, may not be the best way of doing things, but we find it difficult to express a reality without doing so. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is that we changed the title. Maybe you heard when I said the title of the conference was From Religious Indifference to Militant Atheism. And we wanted to express that this was like the pose between which non-religious convictions were, spread out. But it could also be understood as like being a journey, going from one to another, and it would be some kind of a progress. And then we thought this is not our intention at all, you know, like to say people should start from religious indifference and then evolve to a militant atheism, and then that would, you know, be the final step in the journey, and again an evolutionary understanding of things. So we just wanted to keep these two poles, and not any kind of movement, but just say these poles and what is in between is what non-religion is nowadays in France. It's the entire thing that is interesting, and that's why also we kept the question mark. So these were kind of remarks and concluding remarks on definition. I have more general concluding remarks that we have expressed in the book also, but I repeat them here just to say what we came with this book. So I was interested at first, and I got convinced while in the process of doing the setting up the conference and editing the book, that I'm convinced now of the importance of studying non-religion or atheism or religious indifference or irreligion or whatever. Of course, if it is to become an increasingly important part of our society in France, then we need to understand it, because we need to understand how in the future these increasingly non-religious populations will live together, how they will construct the meanings they give to their existence. If the value systems are not regulated or less regulated by the traditional religious belief systems, what's going to be set up and how is it going to work? So it's very important to study this, because it seems that at present what we can say is that our French society is heading towards that. Also, this increase of non-religion will mean that religious groups will increasingly have to think of themselves more and more as a minority in, at best, an indifferent world, at worst, a hostile world. So the rise of irreligion is therefore also changing religion. So studying religion will have to go together with non-religion as affirmations of identity. So here I come back to the market theory I mentioned at first, because in a secularized world, the social sciences of religions probably do not have much of a future if they remain stuck in studying religious and its religions and its multiple small groups. If they take into account the analysis of both the religious and the non-religious, then they are coming towards an important objective, that is of understanding the entire plurality of meanings of existence and the questions that this may pose or not pose for social cohesion. So it is beyond studying religion, it is studying people, and you know what they believe in or what they don't believe in, and how do they relate to it, and how does it organize their lives. So this question of non-religion to me seems now central to social sciences of religion as a whole, and to all those who want to better understand the evolution of society. And so we hope that we helped a little by publishing this book, other people to come to this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anne-Laure. That was wonderful. It's great to hear more about, gain some insights into non-religion in a more European context. So thank you very much again. If anyone has a question or a comment, please just indicate this in the chat box, and then I will prompt you to unmute your microphone and you can ask your question or make your comment to the group. All right, Lori, thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne-Laure. It's really lovely to see you again and to hear you speak about this book. I have, of course, read it and appreciate your drawing out the highlights, because it's been a while since I've taken a look at it. It is a real contribution, I think, to the field and the study of non-religion that you've done this, because I remember when Solange and I were designing the Non-Religion in a Complex Future project, Solange says, But Laurie, the French don't talk so much about non-religion. And there was truly a gap in the literature. So you've really gone a long way to filling that gap. So again, thanks. I'm very grateful to you for this, as I know we all are. I'm curious about a couple of things. One is just what do you think about the sort of, we see a bit of flipping back and forth between the term non-religion and secular. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that, about whether they're the same thing or whether there's a distinction and how you make it, or what you think the advantages or disadvantages might be of each term. And I'm also curious about the term militant atheist, which is one that gets thrown out there in a way that I'm not sure is done always so thoughtfully. So I'm curious about that too, and just your reflections on it. It's not a challenge to the use of it necessarily, but a request for you to elaborate what exactly it means to talk about a militant atheist. So yeah, those are my questions, and thanks again for this wonderful book.
Okay, so you were asking about non-religion and secular. So again, I'm taking lots of precautions and reminding everybody I'm not a specialist with the question, so I may be speaking a load of rubbish there. But it seems to me that when we speak of non-religion in France, we speak about people. And when we speak of secular or secularization, we speak about society. Like a secularization is a process in which different things come together, like diminishing belief in institutions and disaffiliation, and also rise of people declaring being non-believers. Whereas when we speak of non-religion, then we are more focusing on really what people believe and what system of value they have and how do they organize it. You know, it's more the same thing, but with the two different approaches. One would be coming from the people to the group, to the society, and the other one would be from the society to the people who make it. But I may be wrong. And then, well, it's rather comfortable speaking of something which is not your specialty, because so well, if I'm wrong, never mind. I'm not meant to be the reference there. So I'm just speaking from what I learned from all the other people, I should say, true specialists who contributed to this book, and which I heard on other occasions. Now, your second question is on militant atheism. I think that is a very French reality, I guess, probably because of our history, because you know that France has long been a country which was mainly Catholic and really very much dominated by the Catholic Church, which regulated all sorts of social instances, like, well, registrations of birth, for instance, things like that, or education and all that. And the growth and the tolerance towards atheism and non-religion came together for many people with a struggle against the power of the Catholic Church on people's lives and on the social organization. So then we have people who are militant atheists. That is, not only do they not believe in God and they do not want a God, they want things to be without God, atheism, but they also actively work to try and remove or deconstruct or forbid any kind of importance of religion in social life. Like they would try to prevent or forbid any kind of teaching concerning religion at school. They would try to prevent or forbid any kind of taking into account religious voices in the public debate, for instance. Like they would say, why do we have representatives of religious groups in our National Ethics Committee discussing about life termination, for instance? And I know that there are some kind of similar organizations in Belgium, but as far as France goes, then there is this reality of atheist groups which are organized and which are active in fighting against any kind of religious or religion as institution and its place and power in the society. They feel like it is a struggle which will, how could I say, free the entire society if we can get rid of the power of the religious hierarchy and the religions as institutionalized group on people. We had a discussion a few days ago with some colleagues, and we were discussing the fact, I don't know if this is true in other countries, that would be interesting for you to tell me, that in France, we have atheists, people who claim not to believe in God. Some of them organize exactly in a similar way as churches do. And they conduct rituals, and they are organized, and they have a hierarchy, and they have an agenda, and it's interesting to see how atheist groups can be divided and organized. Like some of them say they are against religion, but built on the same model as religion. And some of them say they are against religion, have nothing to do with religion, and don't care at all about any of this. Sorry, it was a very long answer for a short question.
No, that's great. Thank you. Laurie, would you like to respond before we move to Solange?
No, I mean, I think you're calling to attention the possibility of a unique historical context in relation to the word militant is really important. And yes, the Sunday Assembly is something that has happened in a number of places where atheist and non-religious, I mean, that's the thing. It's not necessarily people who self-describe as atheists. They might be simply describing as non-religious and wanting a kind of community or activity that replaces the Sunday church thing. I haven't studied them, so I don't know, but there are a number of people who have. So it's a fascinating phenomenon, as you know. And really, Anne-Laure, I think that we're all relatively new to this, so I really appreciate your weighing in just simply on your reflections on definitions and the way that we're conceptualizing this. We're all new at this. We're all, relatively speaking, this is a somewhat new field of study, although it has glimmers back to the 70s, but not very strong ones. So I think your voice is a most welcome one, even though you say that you're not an expert in this field. I think that what you say makes really good sense and adds a very important dimension. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Laurie. Oh, sorry, I was going to say, Anne-Laure, if you'd like to respond, please go ahead. Otherwise, Solange, you have the floor, so to speak.
Okay, well, thanks, Anne-Laure. Who's an expert anyway? It's a very, you make me realize how complex the field is, eh? So I guess that nobody's really a total expert on, the history of this, the different countries, context, sensitivities, and what I find really interesting, I didn't read the book, I'm sorry, I will, but I saw a few extra, and I've heard you, and it reminds me when we published with Céline Béraud and Martin Meunier the book on Catholicism and culture, Daniel Hervieux-Léger, we launched the book in France, and Daniel Hervieux-Léger noted in the book so many words to express this phenomenon of culture and religion, and she said it's a study in itself. And I guess it's even on the website you have the word non-belief, eh? And depending on the language, it's different. It's true that irreligion was used by Gabriel Lebrun in the early studies of the 20th century. It's like irreligion sounds to me like a French word, but I don't know all the languages, but we should see what it is in German. And so I think in itself, this conceptual variety is very interesting. Mathieu Collin could speak a little bit about atheist groups because he just finished his PhD on the Satanic Temple, which is very, very original in the US, but he could say very briefly a few words and comment on your presentation because he's one of our experts now. He's going to defend in December. But my question also is because of this Catholic history, Anne-Laure, in France, are you aware of the dialogue between the Catholic Church and the non-believers? Because it was established after Vatican II, you know, the council. And in Quebec, it was very strong. They even had a journal on incroyance. You know, le dialogue avec les incroyants, avec l'incroyance, which is, and it was supposedly a global movement. Was it present in France? Was it somewhere a part of the, was it a topic of one of your chapters, or are you aware of this? And you know, of this dialogue between, and actually the Catholic Church is and they did something in Paris. It's Le Parvis des Gentils. It's their new initiative of dialogue with the les gentils being the ancient pagans, or, you know, they say gentil maybe to just to not say anything about non-belief or non-religious or whatever, you know. So are you aware of this? And my last question, sorry, it's terrorism, you know, this, and a new atheism from Britain, especially. Did it have a great impact in France? It had in Quebec. So how is it, if it's not part of the book, you don't have to answer, of course, but I'm curious to know about these.
Sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of your sentence.
Which one?
This one, you said something, is it part of the book? And I don't know.
No, if it is not part of your book, you don't have to answer, of course, if you don't wish to answer. But I was curious. It's how the new atheism from Britain, you know, related to the famous 4 black horses. Does it have an influence in France? And this dialogue between non-believers, or whatever you call them, and the Catholic Church, does it have a presence in your book and in France?
Okay, thanks. So we don't have a chapter specifically on the dialogue between non-believers and the Catholic Church. Philippe Portier mentions it very briefly, but okay. It is a concern of the Catholic Church, but it has not been their main concern in France. Their focus since the 70s has been first what has been called the new religious movements, and all this, you know, kind of bubbling of new different groups, and what should we do with Scientology and with the the Solar Temple, and with the Soka Gakkai, and you know, whatever, all these things that started in the 70s. And so that was between the 70s and the 90s, it was the main focus for the Catholic Church, and every diocese would have its own group of reflection, and, you know, try. So the concern was that they would lose members to these new groups because they would be possibly more attractive, because more lively, or have something of an appeal because they are new, or whatever. And the Catholic Church was mostly concerned with that. And then this started diminishing, and the focus switched to Islam. And the French Catholic Church has done a lot of work, and I could see that in Strasbourg, the group, which was anciently called Le Groupe de Réflexion sur les Nouveaux Mouvements Religieux, has switched its name to Le Groupe de Réflexion sur l'Islam.
Oh.
So we see, and it was at first the same people. Now they have changed, but really, it seems to me that, well, when they speak of dialogue, it's because they want to show that they take into account a reality which they perceive as a threat, either because they think it really is attacking, well, I mean, not physically, sorry, we have to be very careful of our vocabulary nowadays, but it could be something which would bring a loss of believers, or which would bring the believers to question the doctrine and the dogma. So they would perceive it as a threat, and the threat is obviously has been from the new religious movements to Islam. And the non-religion, my guess is, from what I heard from colleagues who are specialists of the Catholic Church in France, more than I am, but that the Catholic Church is a bit ill at ease with this question of non-religion, because it sends back to the question of mission, you know, and proselytism is the same in English, I guess. No, well, okay, but this is something which in France is very much the right wing of the Catholic Church, or other very traditionalist part of the Catholic Church. And the French Catholic Church is a bit torn, because at the same time, it is mostly their more active members, but at the same time, so they don't want to lose them, they don't want to make them angry, but at the same time, they don't totally represent the Catholic Church, and sometimes the Catholic Church may be ill at ease with the kind of political or ethic position of these people. That was seen with all the debates on same-sex couple marriage of same-sex couples, for instance, or on the more recent debate on the possibility of medically assisted procreation, and all this. So Le Parvis des Gentils exactly illustrates this, that it exists, and French Catholic Church obviously will express its satisfaction with it, but doesn't actively promote such actions, just lets people do it if they do it. But it doesn't want to be perceived as a missionary group, because there is in France somewhat of a negative perception of mission, like something which is imposed on people. We have all these difficulties with the colonial history of France, and religions fall into. There is in France a very strong number of people who have a very negative view of religions, whichever they are, but mostly the Catholic Church. And so it has to be a bit cautious about, you know, what it is and how it behaves. So it kind, my feeling is that it navigates between, you know, trying to stick to its traditional values, among which is la mission envers les gentils. But on the other hand, it doesn't want to be too much seen as this kind of conservative and patriarchal and all the other things that are associated with religion as a whole, and Catholicism in particular. Which brings me back to something I wanted to say a bit earlier. So when you spoke of irreligion, it does have a pejorative connotation in France, but because this is a vocabulary that was used mostly in the Catholic Church at first, and it was like it was addressed at people who were lost, you know, in their beliefs and in their thoughts. They were without religion because they had lost their compass and their moral compass as well. You know, much like what Philippe Martin said about atheists in the 18th century. So that was just a parenthesis, sorry. Then the question of new atheism. It exists, of course, in France, but it is not something which is very much organized or which has a very important public visibility. So it's not a very important topic, and we don't have anything in the book on that.
Great, thank you. Solange, would you like to respond? No, okay. Matthew, please go ahead.
Hello, and thank you for your presentation. I'm a fellow French citizen, so nice to meet you. I was particularly interested in the survey about teenagers because I saw two surveys by Libération recently. The first one was about blasphemy and the critique of religion. And it showed that the teenagers in general and young people were more and more hesitant to criticize religion because it was I would say an attack against the identity of religious minorities in particular. And the second survey, which was interesting, was, I think, it's September, and it showed that there was an increase in the belief in God within the teenagers. So I was interested in your survey in the book. I haven't read it yet, but I will do that quite soon. So if you can elaborate on that, it would be really appreciated.
Yeah. Okay, so the study was done by a group from Lyon, and I can provide you with their address if you want to contact them, because what they were interested in, and the survey is about that, is the link between religious feeling or religious belonging and feeling of national belonging. And the result is that this feeling of belonging nationally is particularly strong among those who have no religion and among Catholics which are rather distant from their Catholic upbringing. So more or less we could say that that's a bit rough, but the less people believe and the stronger their national feeling is. And they also have stronger cultural values, people who are without religion, and then people who are have strong religious beliefs. But the people who are the population which is has the greatest specificity is the population of Muslim teenagers, who are very distinct on a number of values and behaviors from the other youth. And this is something that also has been revealed by not only one, but several studies. And if you want to find them, you can find them on the Eurel website, because there's a list of the surveys made in France in which concern religion. And several of them have been issued after, of course, the murder of Samuel Paty. You know, it's been a topic of debate since years in France, since Charlie Hebdo and these issues reactivated when there was an attack against Charlie Hebdo and all that. Is it a question of religious freedom and how do we combine religious freedom on the one hand and respect of religious beliefs on the other hand? And the surveys show that the Muslim teenagers really are a specific group in that respect. They have opinions which are very distinguishable from the other groups. Either they believe more strongly that respect of religious beliefs is stronger or has to be stronger than the freedom of religion. So it's a very specific group. But in a broader approach, there are several surveys, and it's now a trend which has been going on for at least 10 years, maybe 15, which show that there's an important generational change in France concerning religious belonging, and that young people tend to be much more religious than older people. So we have this kind of, U curve, that there are more religious people among the youngest, the less than 25 years old, and among the older, which are more than 65 years old. So of course you have, la question des cohortes and so on. So I won't enter that now, but it seems that when you look into that a bit more precisely, it is because the older religious people would be the Christians, mostly Catholics, of course. Then the younger, the broad group from 25 to 65 years old are mainly or are very less religious. And then the younger ones, which is also composed of much more Muslims than the older groups because of demography and because of recent arrivals and because of combined social dynamics, so the demographic dynamics. And then the young people tend to be more religious than the older one, and also there are more Muslims in this group, and one may explain the other, maybe not only.
Great, thank you. We only have a few minutes left, but Sarah, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick comment following that. Thanks, Anne-Laure. Really interesting talk. I really look forward to reading the book. Just following up on that issue of the kind of youngest demographic having a bit of a bump in religiosity trends, the cultural generation gap that you mentioned, Anne-Laure, which is William Frey's term for that, where there is more minority groups amongst younger generation, is definitely a key factor. The other key factor that I've kind of kept an eye on is that 18 to 25, that young demographic is still, for the most part, living with their parents. And like a key moment for religious disaffiliation, at least for prior generations like Gen X and millennials in France and Canada and other Western countries, has been when they've left home, right? So they leave the original household, they're in that kind of life transition phase of higher education or different jobs. And that seems to be one key life moment where there's at least a portion who then disaffiliate, especially amongst your kind of traditionally Christian white demographic. And so it'd be interesting to see if that actually happens when that age group gets a bit older and they transition, because it happened with millennials, it happened with Gen X. If you actually see that bump continue, or if it in fact kind of matches what we've seen before. But yeah, really interesting, and thank you again for the talk.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and this is a very interesting comment, and thanks for that. But I would also be interested to see how this evolves, and what of statistics we'll get in 10 years' time, if ever we still do surveys on religious affiliation, because there's less and less money devoted to that, since it's less and less an interesting topic as concern votes. So we'll see. Maybe also, in addition to what you've just said, is the fact that age is also a time of identity crisis and the need for personal affirmation, and religion in France is a good topic of asserting yourself, because it is something which is how do you say in English, saillant. It sticks out. That's one element of it. And the second element is also what we call in French la crise d'originalité juvénile, which is the need to be original, unique, different when you're a teenager. Also pushes some young people to try and do things that will seemingly distinguish them from other people. And in France nowadays, affirming religious beliefs is not something which is commonplace. So also all these religious convictions or religious affirmations of religious importance of religion for people, will it remain beyond the age 25 or 30 is a very interesting question. And what will become of that? I really want to know.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So we just have about a minute left, so I'll just ask Anne-Laure if you have any final comments or remarks you'd like to make before we wrap up.
Well, buy the book.
Great, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to be here. As Laurie mentioned, it is a wonderful book. It made for a great session of our Meet the Author series. So thank you again, and thank you to all our participants for being here. I'm just also going to quickly share a link to the Eurel website in the chat because it is such a great resource. So be sure to check that out as well. And yeah, thank you again. I hope everyone has a great rest of their days or evenings, depending on where you are.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was very interesting, and thanks for providing the opportunity of speaking about this book. It was a very interesting conversation and exchange. Thanks.
Of course, thank you. Take care, everyone.